Greetings, everyone. My name is Guy Dauncey. I'm with the Yellow Point Ecological Society, and I'm going to start this evening's presentation with some slides about Ferry Creek, which I will share in silence without making any commentary, and then I will introduce Bill and Kathy. So let me go back to my slides. So that is a good opportunity for me to say that as a settler of British ancestry, I honor the title and rights of the Shtnemoch and the Shtaminas peoples on whose ancestral territories I live and work. Let me introduce my guests. Bill Jones is a Pacheedaht elder who's been an outspoken ally of the blockades from the start. He was born in Port Alberni and spent his early years with his family in Port Alberni and on the Pacheedaht reservation near Port Renfrew. He was sent to the Alberni Indian Residential School. In his 82 years, he's worked for many years in the forest industry, also as an aircraft maintenance engineer and as a nurse. Before the logging roads were built, his grandfather used to paddle up the San Juan River to Ferry Lake and sit in the pools to bathe, meditate, and pray. Bill recalls his grandfather telling him, "You go up there to the forest. You do not cut it. You go there and be quiet. You pray and meditate and ask the forest what you can do, and then you come home." He says, Faith Creek, to me and my uncles and grandfather, was and is a spiritual place. The creeks there, Renfrew Creek and Ferry Creek, are cleansing creeks, so they are spiritually important to the Pacheedaht First Nation. And Kathy Code has been a member of the Rainforest Flying Squad since August 2020, when she was invited to develop the legal team to respond to the Teal Jones court challenges. After finding some grant money and hiring the lawyers, she became a member of the media team. She's worked mostly in the background over the past 14 months, helping with strategic planning, researching, writing, and liaising with people and organizations who support our work to protect the last of our old-growth forests. Kathy's also a board member of the Ecoforestry Institute Society, who are the owners and trustees of Wildwood, a renowned ecoforest and a stellar example of ecoforestry, the gold standard of how forests can be stewarded with respect for generations to come. So, Kathy, Bill, welcome to this evening.
Well, thank you very much for that introduction, Guy, and thank you very much for the opportunity to present to your group. It's quite an honor. I'm sure a lot of people by now probably know the story of Ferry Creek, that we've been in this situation for the past 14 months, and we're now in a position where we are awaiting the next injunction hearings. We did get the injunction lifted. Teal Jones had received an injunction from the court then due to the irreparable harm, so-called irreparable harm that we were causing Teal Jones, and that we were interfering with their economic profit maximization The courts have not been allowed to address the issues of public interest, such as climate change or biodiversity, or any of those really important things. The only things the courts have been allowed to address are the fact that that Teal Jones is suffering economic loss because of our actions in protecting the trees. And that really has been the sole consideration of the courts up till now. On September 28th, though, Justice Thompson of the BC Supreme Court did lift the injunction at that point. He felt compelled to do so because of the evidence that we had submitted, some 4,000 pages that documented the behavior of the RCMP and their tactics at dealing with peaceful and nonviolent protesters. You saw a picture there of the pepper spraying. He also objected to the incident where one officer threw a guitar across the road and another officer promptly stomped on it. He really felt that this was quite unnecessary violence. He didn't really, speak to the rest of the evidence, but it was quite clear that he was perturbed by what he had seen. He also objected to the RCMP wearing the thin blue line insignia, which for many people, and especially Indigenous people, is a sign of white supremacy, and associated then with the genocide of Indigenous peoples that's happened over centuries. And that's something I'd really like to emphasize, is that, we as settler folk have, been involved in this situation for just over a year. RCMP started enforcing in mid-May, and we, at least I, as a Canadian citizen, would never have thought that the RCMP would have used such tactics against peaceful, nonviolent citizens who are protecting something of such great value, far beyond, what profits might go to Teal Jones. They are not allowed to consider that, but still the tactics that they are using to move us out of TFL 46 have been quite shocking. So it's been an amazing experience to see those tactics used against us, and to know that these are the tactics that have been going on for centuries, and that we had no idea that this was going on. So the next step in the injunction process then was that Teal Jones had to have leave to appeal Justice Thompson's lifting of the injunction. And if they got leave to appeal, then the court would hear the actual appeal itself. But in the meantime, they went back to the court and got an interim injunction ahead of the appeal, which is quite astounding to me, actually, because the injunction had been lifted. But anyway, they managed to convince the Court of Appeal justice that the injunction should be reinstated again, pending the Court of Appeal leave to appeal. So it gets very confusing on all these legal technicalities. It's a good thing we have a good team of lawyers that are able to guide us through all this. But it's been something of I guess the big thing is that when we think as Canadian citizens that we have law enforcement and we have the courts to protect us, we don't actually. In things like climate justice, climate change crisis, and things like biodiversity, there is nothing short of government policy. And as we have seen, government policy is not doing much of anything in the way of climate change, protecting biodiversity, and least of all, protecting our old growth forests. And old growth forests are so integral to life and living, and so integral to the way of Indigenous life and culture and tradition, that to lose what's remaining of it, and there's so little of it, it's just so egregious. It's difficult, and that's that's one of the reasons and why we've been able to garner so much support from all over the world, from communities, from across the nation, and globally. We are now the biggest civil disobedience movement in Canadian history. And I can tell you, when we first started out, we just thought we were going to save some old growth trees. We had no idea of the depth that this thing would go to, that it would include Indigenous sovereignty, title, and rights, that it would include climate change crisis, that it would include biodiversity, social and economic justice, that it would include RCMP law enforcement tactics, and the approach of the court, which is not allowed to consider things of existential threat to humanity. So it's been quite eye-opening, to say the least, and I'm really pleased that you are all here and wanting to learn more about this, because it really is very important. So we will continue, whatever happens in the Court of Appeal, we will continue to support Elder Bill and his invitation to remain on unceded Pacheedaht territory, to protect the trees that we can. We're at the point where every hectare counts now. So it's something that the Rainforest Flying Squad and now so many other movements are really dedicated to. We've been very fortunate that people have supported us financially so that we can hire all the legal teams and keep the camp supplied. People have given us donations and goods in kind. It's amazing to see the people making the trek up to Fairy Creek, to show their support for the people on the ground. Everybody from the elders for ancient forests to school kids and people who have had their lives changed and have made this a commitment now to protect the trees and to be part of our movement. So I think now I'll turn it over to Elder Bill then, so that he can talk more about his perspective, from the Pacheedaht point of view.
Thank you, Kathy, and we'll take questions and answers afterwards. So, Bill, welcome to this presentation. The floor is yours. Now Bill is not muted, but his sound is not coming through. Bill,
can you hear? Can you hear me? Oh,
no,
you're muted now, Bill. There.
It's maybe try taking the headphones off entirely, because it's not you're not muted, Bill, but your sound is not coming through. Maybe something on your keyboard. And we've all been through this. Don't take it personally. We know these problems.
Oh, okay. So yeah, he's not coming through at all. Maybe he's not hooked in.
Everyone else, no, Bill is not muted. Everyone else is muted, but Bill is not.
Okay. Bill, are you sure your headphones are plugged in? Because we can't hear you. He can usually hear my voice. So we can't hear you, Bill.
Bill, if you take the headphones off and unplug them, maybe your straight voice will do it. Unplug them from your computer as well. And now see if that works. Nothing yet. No. Oh my goodness.
Is that?
Yes, we have action.
Yes, perfect.
The floor is yours, Bill.
Oh my. So I'm coming through.
Yes.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Oh, good. Yeah. Oh my. And my experience with the Fairy Creek struggle, I think it actually gave me finally at 81 my adult maturation. I finally really grew up sitting up at the forest there, and I didn't know I had. I started off about 6 years ago, I guess, or so, with the helping to try save some of the Walbran ecosystem, and we were marginally successful there. But and then things started here in Fairy Creek in the early August of last year, and I was called up, and I didn't really anticipate any deep emotional involvement in the whole struggle until finally, I guess about November or December, during a storm, I sort of sensed a change in myself, and that in fact um, there was no conscious or I guess I could say there was sort of a deep set or sublime change in my attitude, that I decided that I was now a different being, and that in fact I am now committed wholly and totally, I guess, to my values, and that those values were given to us by our grandfather. Our forefathers always exhorted us to not to cut the forest down, to not deface the forest at all, to ask the forest what it will give you. And of course, we all paid lip service to Grandpa. Yeah, sure, Grandpa. Yeah, okay, we'll do that. And never did. And I wound up a logger. And it was the middle of it's October 1984, October 14th, where BC Forest cut their workforce from close to 400, 390 to 190. And I was amongst those laid off. And I was asked, I asked the personnel manager, when will you call me back? And he said, oh, in about 300 years. And he started laughing insanely, I guess, having to lay off, oh, I don't know, close to 200 men to say, don't come back forever. You know, we literally ran out of wood. That was BC Forest. And actually, I got to be casual friends with the general foreman, who informed me that the reason BC Forest is leaving is because the second growth cut of the forest is about 1/9 the volume that, no, 1/7 the volume of the original forest, and that it's economically not viable. It's not sustainable with the equipment they had of huge volumes taking out, when we only have 1/7 the volume to go over on the second time around. So I thought that was so sad and devastating to me. And then I started realizing how totally and utterly we had harvested our whole forest, and that we're now left with about 3% of the original what we used to call in my young manhood virgin forest or ancient forest. The names change often, but anyway, I realized that we are in fact on the end game, and it's sort of sad to me that the political control and the legal part of the law enforcement of this is being demonstrated, that the whole economic system is protected by police. That in fact the colonialist extraction system is basically a custody of the law enforcement agency, and they are committed to first look after the interests of industry, and then actually, from what I gather, there is no regard for ecosystem or personhood of the forest, and that in fact um, we have no eco protection for rivers and the land at all, and that's it's so sad to me that the main part of my spiritual instructions are to pray and meditate in the forest, which isn't there anymore, and that we my experience up at Fairy Lake was up till about 1984, 85. I had been going up there, but I after that I couldn't. Arthritis got the best of me, and I wasn't able to make it up. We used to have to go to the front way in them days. So, but I used to walk the logging roads. My uncles actually went to the back part of the Fairy Fairy Lake ecosystem, and they would walk through the forest praying and meditating. That's my uncle Danny and my uncle Wesley. So that's the only two I actually bumped into who were um, using the forest as a prayer place, along with my brother Russ, my older brother, and my other brothers used to use. It says walk up Brown's Mountain, just up here from my house. So that whole system has been looked upon as a spiritual place. Um, and a long time back, Grandpa Charlie told me that, in fact, we had a what they call a sockeye creek, Granite Creek, called Renfrew Creek, had a good run of sockeye in May, and people used to paddle from as far as the Hood Canal and in places in Washington State, and up from the South Island there, and all the way up from Nitnat, and they'd paddle to go and harvest our sockeye salmon, which were small, about 4 or 5 pound salmon in a small lake. And that was a very tasty treat that I experienced only once in my life. 1944, I was 4 years old. And didn't come back to me till I was about 40 years old. I asked Mom, I says, what were we doing up at Fairy Lake when I just remember being up there at 4 years old. And I remember eating, we used to call it heads and tips. That's fish heads and fin tips. And that was one of our favorite childhood soups of all things. And I remembered eating that. And Mom said, well, you were just a boy and you were up there. And then I asked her after that, I says, when was the last run up there? She said, well, you were in a boarding school when the last harvesting was taken there. And that was in 1954, Mom said. So there wasn't any large crowds in my childhood. I didn't, well, at 4 years old, you don't remember much anyway. But Grandpa said that people did come to Port Renfrew to enjoy the harvest and do prayer and meditation at Fairy Creek in particular. And that's it's sort of sad for me to look back at Fairy Creek because in the early 80s, when I was still able to walk off trail, I would walk up Fairy Creek and there was pools up there, but they filled with boulders about 10-inch, 12-inch boulders all the way from the top canyon to a community park, and it's all filled with boulders now. And I was wondering, where did they come from? How did they wind up filling the creek? Then it occurred to me that it must be acid rain, because none of the forest was logged or was cut down as yet, and all that boulder fill up of the Fairy Creek right down to the lake is I feel from acid rain. And what I thought was that, now let's see, maybe the pH of the soil up in the upper creek was more basic, and then when the acid rain came along, that swung the pH to more acidic, which is more.
We'll just hang on for a short while in case Bill's connection comes back. These things happen.
Long to describe my experience. So I feel that acid rain caused the boulders to tumble down and fill up the Prayer Creek. And so now it's still in a standstill. Our fisheries man, Jeff, who is our current chief, and told me once when I asked him about Fairy Creek, how it's surviving, and he said he's counted 9 sockeye going up Granite Creek or Renfrew Creek now, and that it's in a marginal recovery. So if it's protected over the years, both creeks will, really recover quite nicely, given that it's not crippled by global warming. So now that gives me another worry that I guess it's not cold enough for sockeye anymore. They're a cold water fish, and my learning is the fact that they actually used to up in Adams River lay their eggs in under a mile of ice. So that they were 8 or 10 inches long, or so the plaque said at Adams River, up at Thompson River. So to me, that says to me that the sockeye are a very cold water fish, and that now they with global warming, that's about it for their survival. But there's lots and lots of ecologic stuff that I'm sort of wondering about, and why I can't find answers to these questions. It seems like a lot of research is not made known to public, that in fact we're not let known at all, except for academics. Even the water testing here is restricted. I can't go take any water to a lab. I tried to take water to a lab to have it, just analyzed for potability. And the lab I brought it to, I said, "Do you have a permission statement from your band council to test your water?" And I said, "No. They said, "Well, we can't do that. That's a government regulation that we are not allowed to test water, except only one that can test them." They said are like the city officials and people permitted to test water. About I'm so fraught with doubt about government regulations that any of my freedoms, I guess, are sort of quashed by regulations. That's not a part of what that's my big problem, is that the whole of the ecosystem is fraught with problems that are encroaching on the spiritual strength of a forest, and that in fact now it's under total threat with the last of the ecosystem, Fairy Creek. And I think I better leave it at that, because I'm meandering too much and not being true to my hopeful prayer is that we just save it for spiritual purposes and needs, and have them still standing for studies and eco tourism. So that's a dream plan, but it's way in the future. We have to persuade our band council to get out of the grip of logging contracts and give a broader view to our forest, which is totally, well, enveloping to our world. Everything seems to start from the forest and likely will end in the forests. And I think our great mother will regenerate her forests after an ice age or two. Meanwhile, our tenure will be over on Earth by then. So
Bill, your meanderings are rivulets of beauty and truth that roll through the tributaries within our minds.
Oh, thank you.
So don't dismiss them as meanderings, because what does nature do? Nature meanders. Nature doesn't run in straight lines the way the surveyors put the lines down. It meanders, and it picks up ecological value and beauty and fish and bears and truth along the way. Your words are wonderful, and we'll come back. There's lots of questions and answers coming up. Kathy, do you want to throw any more thoughts in before we open the floor up?
Yeah, just a couple of observations of two reports in particular that we're waiting for right now. The first is from the technical advisory panel that the Premier has touted will be saving old growth forests. We still haven't heard from them. Their report is now overdue, and there's no indication of when this report might actually be released publicly. The other event that we're waiting for is the 10-year review of the Teal Jones forest management of TFL 46. This is supposed to be accompanied by a public consultation. So we have been eagerly awaiting the opportunity then to provide some input into that process. That process as well is overdue. That report should have happened the May 24th of this year, and it's now October, still no sign of this overdue and legislated requirement. So this is of some concern to us. So in the meantime, then we are suspended. Our folks are on the ground awaiting to figure out what the RCMP are going to do. The RCMP have been through a number of our camps. Fortunately, we're pretty mobile. And we're not quite sure what form of activity the RCMP are going to take this time around. But we have assured everybody that we will be documenting everything that they do with video, with photos, with firsthand accounts. We will continue to collect that information. And so we're in a bit of a holding pattern, but spirits are high. People are determined to to maintain their presence in the forest, you know, over the coming fall and winter months, which I tell you, takes some dedication to sit out there in the BC cold winter in the mountains. So I really applaud those people on the ground for their passion and their commitment. So, you know, if of course people now want to know what they can do, you know, come to Fairy Creek. Please do come and show up for our folks and let them know that you support them. But it's not always possible for people to come physically to Fairy Creek. So we do have a fundraiser campaign so that you can send some funds to support our legal teams and our folks on the ground. People have been sending donations in kind, like tents and warm winter clothing, wool clothing, sleeping bags, food, you know, baked goods, foods that are cooked or dried goods, because we do have some amazing camp cooks, thank goodness, who are able to turn anything into delicious meals for everybody in camp. So there's lots of stuff that you can do. Look at our the Last Stand for Ancient Forests website. There's usually a list somewhere on either of our Fairy Creek blockade Facebook or the Rainforest Flying Squad Facebook. You could often find lists of supplies that are needed. So, and you know, just get hold of me or somebody you know in the movement, and we'll make arrangements to make sure that everything gets to where it's most needed. So, but I want to thank you, everybody, for coming to this event and for the show of support. So on to your questions now.
Yes, so let's open up the floor. If you want to ask a question, just put a note in the chat box, and you can open up your mic. So in the meantime, June Ross from the Watershed Coalition is asking two questions. Is there any way to force identification onto the RCMP through their badge numbers? And what is happening with the charges against the RCMP by the protesters?
Yeah, well, that was one of the things that Justice Thompson was particularly offended by, was that the orders from above, from RCMP commanders, had instructed RCMP officers to remove identifying information from their uniforms. And he objected to that on the grounds that justice should not be offered in an anonymous form. After all, he's identified, all the lawyers are identified. So, and he wasn't convinced that that we were actually harassing officers, which we don't do. I mean, that's just ridiculous. We've been accused of several things that always conveniently happen just around court time, of things that we never did at all. So, but it just seems to be a way to try and color the justice's perception of us. Fortunately, Justice Thompson didn't buy that. He recognizes, in his words, he's called us respectful, intelligent, morally responsible people. So he has an indication of just who we are, which we really appreciate. I don't know how RCMP officers can be made to wear badges and names. Their command has given them instructions not to. We'll have to see what happens. I mean, they've been told not to wear the thin blue line insignia, and they still do. Okay. They've been ordered by their commanding officers not to do that. It's not part of their uniform, and they still do it. So who knows what they'll do, but we'll be documenting that.
So Dave Haley from locally around here in Yellow Point is asking, can you give an update on the fundraising efforts to buy the harvesting rights from Teal Jones?
Oh, well, just to give you a little bit of background, Teal Jones has a 25-year lease on Pacheedaht unceded territory. I mean, that's really the basis of this land, is unceded Pacheedaht territory that government considers crown land that they feel entitled to turn around and lease to industrial forest companies like Teal Jones. So Teal Jones was given that lease in 2012. That's why they're having a 10-year review right now. And so they have quite a few more years to go. I have heard, although I've not been able to confirm, that their annual take from harvesting TFL 46 is somewhere around $132 million. I'm still trying to confirm that figure. Of this, government gets a small amount in terms of stumpage fees, and the Pacheedaht people get the grand sum of $242,000 for this year, which is quite unbelievable and inequitable. And as an agreement that's been signed by my government, I'm quite ashamed as a settler that my government would sign an agreement like that with the Pacheedaht people. That's disgraceful.
So
buying these rights then would cost so much money. Actually, and what it would actually take is a directive from the minister. All the minister has to do is write a directive, and especially now at this critical point in the 10-year review, they could change whatever they wanted and just say, sorry, Teal Jones, you're out of business. This is unceded Pacheedaht land. We're not doing this anymore.
So Kathy, Gunilla Uxwick, if I hope I pronounced that right, is saying that Trudeau's promised, I think he set aside $50 million to protect old growth. And Ken Wu from the Endangered Ecosystems Alliance, who was very active with the Ancient Forest Alliance, has raised the point in an interview on the CBC on The Current that it will come down to money to be able to buy the old growth, the ancient forest, and preserve it by a combination of federal and provincial money. Is that the way you think this will get resolved?
Well, I think that when we look at this in terms of unceded Pacheedaht territory or unceded First Nations lands, I think, it would behoove those nations to rise up, and some of them have, and said, this is our unceded territory. You're not coming in anymore. You have no rights to our forests. You have no rights to our minerals. So we are now forbidding you access to our territory. To think that money is the solution to this problem, I mean, it would cost so much money if we did go that route. But the fact is that this is primarily unceded Pacheedaht territory, and government has the power to give it back. Under UNDRIP, under DRIPA, there are rights and titles that First Nations hold in law that are being deliberately ignored.
So we got a lot of questions coming in. There's two very practical ones. One, Jay Van Oetstam is saying, we've been going to Fairy Creek HQ since March, and we have a small trailer. Now that Lizard Lake and Fairy Lake campgrounds are closed, where can we stay safely with a small trailer? Very practical, quick answer.
Oh yeah, just go to the roadside camp on Pacific Marine Road, and they will give you the best instructions. They will know what's going on the ground and where it's safe for you to park.
Okay, and then Pat is saying, what is it like on the ground right now? Which camps are still standing? Are the RCMP present, and is logging happening?
Yes, logging is happening in certain cut blocks, and many of the cut blocks actually that they pushed us out of. We still have waterfall and a ridge camp, I believe. These things keep changing, and they keep changing the names of them, so I can never keep up with them all. But we still do have established camps up there, but we are learning that we have to be more mobile if we are going to evade the RCMP.
Thanks. And June Ross had a second question, which is, what is happening with the charges against the RCMP by the protesters?
Yeah, that's still pending. The contempt charges are still pending, and we're still looking at other strategies and to try and bring this into the court as well. Yeah,
and Dave Haley has a backup question, which is, do you actually encourage people to donate money to purchase the rights or not?
Oh, well, I know a lot of people do. I know it's a highly popular thing, but personally, I would rather see the First Nations claim their unceded territories, and I'd rather see our government do the right thing and give it back to them.
Yeah. I know David Suzuki, welcome. I know you've joined us on the call, and Sonia's asking a question. If you'd like to say a few words about your feelings about what's happening here and share them with Bill.
Thanks. I just came in far too late to be able to say anything right now. I'm just I'm just listening.
Well, Bill is waving at you.
I'm sorry I can't meet you, Bill. As I told you, I've chosen a different path. My heart and everything is with you and the people there. And because I think that you're fighting for a far bigger thing than just Fairy Creek. It's, but my strategy is that since this is Indigenous land, it's the Indigenous people that have got to really call the shots, and they have not allowed me permission to come in and speak and share my ideas. I'm at a point now in terms of the climate issue, and climate and biodiversity they're inextricably interlinked. I mean, the major sequestration of carbon is, of course, our ancient forests. But where we've filled up the carbon budget, there is no carbon budget now. 1.5 is nothing that we can aspire to. We've already reached that. We're past that. The question is how soon we're going to get to 2 degrees, and the incapacity of our so-called representatives, our leaders, to respond is the thing that is so awful. This isn't right on Fairy Creek, but Trudeau called an election that was absolutely unnecessary and purely political. He thought his performance on COVID would give him a good majority, the way Horgan's decision to call an election did. The day after the election results came in, Trudeau announced that he had a victory. How can you claim a victory when O'Toole got more votes than Trudeau? But because of our first past the post system, which Trudeau promised would be the last after he was first elected, that system allowed Trudeau to gain a majority, more than O'Toole, of seats. He claimed a victory and said he had a mandate. So, this guy is just a pure political animal. So I wrote Wilkinson that day and I said, look, it is a simple lie that he won or that it was a mandate. The Canadian public did what we environmentalists hope for. They didn't give either leading parties a majority. And what I believe the mandate was, work together with the other parties the way you did with COVID. When COVID hit, you responded in a way that suddenly gave huge amounts of money we didn't even know was there, and you worked together with the other parties. And that's what we have to do now. Go to Glasgow and declare a genuine emergency and put everything behind it. His response to me was what Greta said, blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah.
Thanks, David. If Bill Jones was to invite you directly, would that still put you in a very difficult spot? I really understand the difficulty you're in. Or Bill, do you want to say some words to David directly, Bill?
Well, I still openly invite Mr. Suzuki to come up Fairy Creek, even anonymously. And I know you're supportive, and I know we all are passively supportive, and either way, going up there without voicing any opinion, I think will be very, very, very much appreciated, especially by all the countless children who idolize Mr. Suzuki. And so I openly invite you yet. The invitation is always and forever. So come up anytime. And I feel that because of my imprisoned or entrapped band council in crippling predatory contracts, I think that made them helpless in doing anything, even if they wanted to save the ecosystem. They are at loss because imprisoned by the three, well, I guess you could call Teal Jones a government, then the BC government, and also the federal government, who engineers and sort of entrenches the crippling system that it's imposing on First Nations people, so that with the tenor system, if the government doesn't get what they want with one band council, they'll just pass it by and let it go for another 2 years until they find another council that is favorable. And that's the way the government has been operating on my reserve for about 40 years now. And likely that's, from what I gather in particularly the pipelines, okaying by most First Nations, it was also systematically the federal government or provincial government systematically worked and finally got what they wanted from Indian Act First Nations. So it's that's another part, I feel, that the government is now being quiet about the whole affair because they don't want the world to know or understand how they use the First Nations to get to get what the extraction industries want. And I think that is crucial now in our fight in Fairy Creek, because the kids are learning up there and they are starting to realize the facts of our I guess I could call it coercive government, where they have not dealt with any issues at all, honestly, and they use the Indian Act to divide and rule and totally disregard oh boy, our unceded territories, unless it's convenient. And even our chief has been doing the same thing when talking to him about saving the Fairy Creek. On one side of his argument, he say, "Well, okay, we're going to do this. We have a 2-year moratorium, and that we're not logging." Then, in fact, they're still, going full steam ahead when they can. Will get by the blockades. So, and then on another part of his argument, he switched and says, "Well, that's unceded territory, so it's ours." Then, "Oh no, we can't do that. It's Crown land." And so we have contradictory policies in all the governments that doesn't help our forests at all, and is designed actually to cripple our forests and our caring about the forest ecology. So I'll leave that before I start complaining.
I should let you know, Bill, that I have talked to Murray Rankin, and Murray Rankin, talks about how, he understands and very favorably inclined, but he's using the Pacheedaht as his cover. He says, "Oh, well, they've called a 2-year moratorium and they're leading the shots. What more can I do?" I tried to get in touch with Judith Sayers, but of course, she had the accident where the plane flipped and she was in pretty shaky condition after the accident. I'm hoping, I know that Miles Richardson, who has a program for developing this whole concept of nationhood, which I'm very excited by, and that he is looking at dealing with the Pacheedaht or possibly the new channels as a way of invoking, genuine nationhood. But I said, you can't to Miles, you can't enter into that, or with the Wet'suwet'en who he's talking to as well. You can't do that if you aren't guaranteed there will be no development period until that kind of process is over, and I doubt whether the government will go along with that. So we'll have to see what happens. For me
Yeah.
personally,
Yeah.
I'm following very closely Extinction Rebellion, and I would like to put my body on the line and get arrested. I think it will be at the airport in Vancouver, and I hope that they're as violent with me as they have been with some of the kids at Fairy Creek, because I think that would be great.
Yeah.
If they're going to take an
Yeah.
old man who is peacefully protesting and beat him up, I don't think there could be anything better than that to happen.
Bill, do you have
Mhm.
any response to?
Oh my, well, it's very pondersome for me to consider nationhood, because Canadian history has always been divide and rule. And oh boy, let's see, what will the Quebecois think of the Pacheedaht First Nations nationhood, or even back in further history, the French Acadians, where they lost a lot of their land to the English. They'll say, "Oh, what about us?" And then the Métis with the in Manitoba, there, oh boy, there'll be, I think, so many people speaking up about their personal or land losses to, and it will make it sort of almost not doable. And I don't think it's doable at this time, and that in fact we have to sort of skirt around sovereignty and unceded territories for a while and simply concentrate on making our great mother a person. If we got corporations as persons, we should get ahead of it and make our great mother a person. That way we'll be empowered to speak up on behalf of our great mother, and that we will have something addressable in economic management of oh boy, our ecologies. And so I think that messy start is with treaty and sovereignty and land use. Actually, it's an odd thing to me. My point of view is that now let's see, my people, except for me, a young woman, Pally, and we're the only ones from our reserve up at the Fairy Creek blockade, and probably about close to 20 other First Nations people actively involved from all over Canada. Now, that to me is sort of an odd statement of the fact that my people don't seem to understand or care about unceded territory, and that in fact they're comfortable on within the local economy of the Ministry of Indian Affairs, the reservation system, and the Indian Act. So we're locked in a ghetto, and we don't want to get out. And that is a very pondersome problem to me, because how are we going to consider sovereignty and unceded territory without us developing a concept of what our territory is, when we're in fact locked in this prison of 300 or so acres of land and watching TV. So as far as truth and reconciliation is concerned, I think it will have to come from the top. I think Trudeau will have to say, yes, we are corrupt in our support of of extraction economy, and that we have to reconsider our First Nations and also Canadians ourselves, because 95% of the people up at Fairy Creek now, or any of the protests, were non-First Nations. And I think that's very trying for me to and ponder some, how am I going to teach our people? It's odd. Grandpa said, go up there and pray and meditate. And I think that is probably the only instruction that I got from my grandfather, that my sublime self said, you have to do that. And then it's helped me realize that I am a part of this territory, that it is my territory. And now these kids are up there claiming the territory, because usage is 90% of territory. So these, I don't know, 200 or 300 kids up there now are actually our true First Nations, and our former First Nations are squashed within 300 acres of land, and we don't know how to get out of it because we're taught not to think. And I think that is the most awesome problem that the Indian Act has created in Canada. It was okay for the oppressive years, but when we're starting to try to get a thinking society and a responsible First Nations people looking after their land, we're going to have to go right back from square one to go back to school and re-indigenize ourselves, as those kids up in the protest said. We are re-indigenizing ourselves, and I think that's a biggest gain that Canadian society has of this movement, is the fact that the kids are starting to realize themselves and their values. And now that it's very undefeatable, they can't be defeated, and it's impossible. It's just, they have been by the beatings of the cops, they have gained a fullness in their own holding of their values. And I think that is a crucial thing that Prairie Creek has taught me, is the fact that these kids are now unbeatable. Their value system is so strengthened by of all things, the police violence, that they are now totally empowered by their own selves. And I think they're so happy about that and joyous that, you know, they enjoy the rain.
So, Bill, can I put
I better leave it at that.
Let's get a question to you, Bill, from Julius Sotoni. He says, Elder Bill Jones, many thanks for all that you do to preserve this mother forest. You commented on so few members of your nation showing up at Fairy Creek in person. Can you comment on the problem that MLA Adam Olson, who's with the Sawoot First Nation in Saanich, but MLA Amal Olson mentioned that forestry contracts are currently written up by industry and condoned by the BC government in such a way that they require First Nations leaders to refrain, once signed, from actions that would interfere with forestry activities. And worse, that they're also compelled to silence opposition from their communities to the forestry contract activities. I would imagine that this is an enormous problem that, lost my voice there, an enormous problem that needs to be addressed, and a prime example of very harmful colonialism. Any responses to that, Bill?
I think he has a true understanding of it. And yes, our system is at the end game of the colonialist system, and that the business interests are forcing and enforcing government and the police to continue their role over the ecosystem until there's nothing left. And I think that's their main motive now, and along with the fact that they don't want people to become aware of the trickery government uses to get and give industry the power to extract what they want. And I think now these kids up there are now getting the hang of it and realizing that their government is manipulative and dishonest to support industry. There
If I
was one
could-
politician who, yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Oh, sorry, Bill, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I just wanted to point out that there really is an urgency in this situation, in that the Pacheedaht are in step 5 of the 6-step treaty process. This means that the agreement in principle has been signed off by the federal government, the provincial government, and by Chief Jeff Jones of the Pacheedaht. This agreement essentially gives the Pacheedaht less than 2,000 hectares of their unceded 160,000 hectares of unceded territory, and something like $20 million, which is reduced by a number of conditions. And also the Bill has mentioned previously that the band is some $30 to $40 million in debt already. So if the treaty is signed and there is a ratification process to be gone through yet, the Pacheedaht will be left with nothing but debt. And it's a pretty shameful circumstance for anybody to allow Indigenous peoples to be in.
There are several questions.
Yeah.
Do you want to respond to that, Bill? Or shall I go on to more questions?
No, I think that's about it. It's it's a very grim picture.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think the Fairy Creek struggle has now helped expose all these government entrapping treaties and crippling contracts, and oh boy, it leaves us virtually nailed to the cross. We can't
yeah.
move either way.
So one thing, I mean, Suzanne Gregory is asking why logging is happening when there's supposedly a 2-year moratorium or deferral, but that's not on some of the lands within Fairy Creek, I believe, right? It doesn't cover all the lands, right? And there's a critical question from Gertie Josh on the legal side. What can be done in terms of moving the court to deal with existential threats? And that's backed up by Kim Trainer, who says, I was at Fairy Creek last weekend in a car convoy with Bill Jones that attempted to access Waterfall Camp for ceremonial purposes. We were stopped at a metal locked gate, and a white Teal Jones Jeep with a security guard had told us that access would be only granted at the pleasure of Teal Jones. And Andrew Shadrach from the Kootenays says, the well-known economist in Britain, Sir Nicholas Stern, has clearly stated that there are economic impacts to not tackling climate. As the Fairy Creek legal team considered a class action suit against Teal Jones on the grounds that they're endangering our future economy, and that ties in with your points, Bill, that we need to give legal rights to the forest and the river in the way that New Zealand has done with their big rivers. So, and the way that the people behind the call for that crime of ecocide are calling for. Otherwise, nature is, in standard economics, nature is an externality that is just pushed off the table because you can't measure it financially. So there's a big legal discussion coming up here that's really important, I think. Kathy or Bill, do you want to respond on the legal side of things?
Well, I'll just say quickly that we have tried to introduce the public interest with regards to climate change and loss of biodiversity, and the court has rejected those, saying that they are matters of policy, matters of government, and that's where our quarrel lies. And as you know, government is not forthcoming on either those subjects.
So the law gets changed when it goes to the highest and the highest level, to the Supreme Court of Canada. We need a court ruling that because of the global climate crisis emergency and the biodiversity emergency that threaten all of our existence on this planet, that the Supreme Court needs to give a ruling that nature needs to have equal status to us predatorial humans. Is your legal team able to take it right to the Supreme Court?
Yeah, I guess given time. I mean, these things are monumentally slow. I don't know that we have enough time to do that, to tell you the truth. We estimate between 4 to 6 years of old growth left in BC.
Yeah.
I don't know that we have time to do that.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's certainly something that our legal teams have considered over and over again. What is the best strategy?
Kaisia Kagu has a very practical question. Are the forestry contracts confidential or can they be made public?
They're available publicly on government websites.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone else have questions? We have another 10 minutes or so if we go until 8:30. Ofri Livnir says the courts will not legislate and they'll resist doing so. We need to hit the government and demand the change. And Kevin Mackay says, what's the political lever to move the Horgan government? How can we get them to enact the recommendations of their own forestry report and protect all of the remaining old growth forest? Is the government brewing some new initiative or response, Kathy?
I mean, John Horgan seems particularly resistant to Fairy Creek right now, so I'm not sure that he will do anything in terms of saving anything other than what he's deferred already, which doesn't protect one single hectare of the old growth that we are protecting. So I'm really, the government does not seem willing. And for another thing, that, as fast as they pretend to defer things, they are shoveling auction blocks off through BC timber sales, through old growth blocks. So they're cutting it as fast as they can.
Yeah, some very practical questions from Kim Trainer. Kaisia Kagul says, Kathleen, where can warm clothes donations be dropped off? Is there an address in Victoria? And Kim adds plastic waterproof containers to hold supplies and no cotton, wool, merino. Kim, merino wool, waterproof clothing, oilskins. What kind of supplies are wanted?
Yeah, I mean, if you, the best way for you is to contact me directly at CODEKAT 999@gmail.com, and I will put you in touch with our bus system. We have a bus system that leaves every Saturday morning. So people are adjusting their schedules and their baking and their food goods then to put on the bus Saturday morning for the journey up that day.
Can you put your email in the chat that people can see?
Yes.
That?
Yeah,
You got it there already, right?
Yeah.
And there's a question whether from Gunilla Axwick whether Horgan can be recalled. Horgan, who's the MLA for the Esquimalt region right up to Port Renfrew, has very strong support in his riding. You have to get more than 10% to even get a recall petition through. And I think the evident witness, the sort of belief so far is it's not a useful strategy. You waste an awful lot of energy. If it backfired on you, it gives him a mandate to carry on doing what he wants. Adam Olson is suggesting forming citizens or lobby groups to lobby the government. That's absolutely what is needed. People need to get into their groups, they lobby their MLAs and make sure that they really hear about this politically.
Yeah, well, the MLAs have been lobbied to death already. We have pounded on them with emails and rallies in front of their offices and phone calls, and they are not listening. They've got a canned response that they're giving out to everybody. They're not listening, and they are all acting as a block.
I think that though we have the same issue on the climate crisis, the MLAs within caucus are kind of obliged to follow discipline and they're not going to speak up, but privately, we're pretty sure that there are MLAs who really care about this, who are really concerned. David, do you want to throw some words in? David Suzuki.
Yeah, I just want to say in terms of the politics of the BC government, there is no one more deeply embedded in the NDP who speaks every Monday morning on CBC on behalf of the NDP, and that is Mo Sahota, who is a paid lobbyist for LNG. Surprise, surprise. Why is the government supporting LNG? a paid lobbyist for Shoppers Drug Mart. Shoppers wants to get into our public medical system, so they're now administering shots. He's a paid lobbyist for the forest industry. He's a paid lobbyist for the long-term care homes, and you got to bet there's going to be an inquiry about that as soon as this COVID crisis is over. Mo Sahota is a guy you want to get at this government. Get that guy the hell out of there.
So David, you've raised an immediate action that we can take. It's a very small one, but if everyone was to send an email to the CBC for the On the Island show in Victoria and ask that Mo Sahota be replaced on their Friday morning panel because he is a lobbyist for the LNG industry for various things, and he's compromised, and he should be replaced as a panelist to represent on that. That's something those who feel like, I think, would be valuable to do, because CBC probably doesn't hear much. They've had the same 3 panelists there for ages and forever.
Yeah, well, Hammer Horgan. It's disgraceful that he allows this, that this guy's speaking on behalf of them.
Yeah, his Mo Sahota, his name has been put into the chat. Other thoughts from anyone before we close? Kathy or Bill, do you want to wind things up? I know we could go on all night on this one, but we have to.
Yeah, I mean, as far as the political ties go, I mean, John Horgan has deep ties with the Truck Loggers Association, with the United Steelworkers Union, with Teal Jones, with Jeff Jones personally, they're boyhood friends. So I mean, it seems he's pretty deeply embedded in with those folks, and the end result is what we see then is the standoff on the mountain. But even knowing that, we will continue to stand and in partnership with Bill Jones as long as it takes. We are losing the trees up there as Teal Jones comes in and cuts them down. But at the same time, we have inspired other communities and who have developed their own blockades and now are using our blockade tactics in the forms of sleeping dragons and hard blocks. And so I think as more and more citizens of BC wake up and find out what's being done with our natural resources and the state that we're in, I think that there will be a chance that eventually things will come around our way. But for now, the law enforcement, the courts, the government, we can't count on those to be of assistance to us at this time.
So there is a note from Nilam Chada in the chat on the Facebook page that gives the links for what supplies are needed on a regular basis. So you can see that in the chat. On the MLAs, I know that Josie Osborne, who was the mayor of Tofino, was totally behind the Clayoquot movement. She saw how the economy of Tofino changed when people understood the value of leaving the forest in place. And so I think friendly letters to Josie, because she's going to have a split problem. She's on caucus, and yet I know she holds these deeper values. Just to encourage her to sort of speak up for these things in caucus and not feel shy when there are other views within the NDP. They need to be shared within caucus, I think. Bill, do you want to have the wrap-up words, and then we'll call it a day?
Oh my God. How to settle a night and how to settle, the protection of all the old growth forest. We'll have to just be as resolved as the kids are up there and encourage them and as they encourage me. So I'll be going up every day to talk to whoever I can, which I usually do, health permitting. And I hope to see all of you up there soon. Thanks.
So I'm going to do a thing to close. I'm going to go to full gallery. I encourage everyone to turn their cameras on and go to reactions and send some heart love to Bill and all the people who are working so hard. You can click in the reactions. You can send that heart like I've done. We're sending you love, support, a sharing of your deeper values. Do you feel that, Bill? Do you see the screen, Bill? Do you see that coming to you?
Well, yeah, yeah, it's the kids' values that they've was
Yeah.
born up there from the beatings of the cops, of all things.
Yeah, it's a hard part.
We-
And
the yeah,
the,
it's so uplifting to watch them. There was a very symbolic thing happened up there. The cops built a ditch across the road and had our bus stuck there. And we finally got up to what they call headquarters camp. And we got up there, and the kids started immediately shoveling the gravel back into the trench that the cops built. And when they finished that, in about 20 minutes later, they started dancing over it. And that was when my soul knew, that they are a part of me and I am a part of them. To watch these young people throwing gravel down in a ditch and stamping on it with their feet and dancing joyously. And I knew then that it was a joyful struggle. That's an odd thing to say, to especially the beatings that the kids have had. How could they find joy in a beating when they know? In fact, I think now I realize and understand is that they're being revealed to themselves their values. And I think that is the most joyous thing that keeps me going up there. So I'll see you guys up there too.
thank you, Bill. We're all in us to go to our deeper values at this time of critical crisis. So I'll thank everyone. I'll thank you so much, Bill. Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, David, for joining in. Blessings to all. And I'll close with those slides.
Yeah, David. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. And
you're all cordially invited.
Okay, so I'm going to close by sharing those slides again on how you can help. And thank you, everyone.
I
did it. I managed to send it in time. I finally